Well, the brand wars are here once again. With HIYA Toys officially doing classic Godzilla action figures, people are once again asking, will this beat SH MonsterArts? Now, I'd like to tackle this question from the perspective of a more casual customer whose voice I don't really often feel is captured by content creators. Like, when you think back to when NECA was mass producing their $20 figures that you could find at Target, there had to be a lot of people that were just casually strolling through Target, and maybe they'd take a walk down the aisle, they'd see a $20 Godzilla figure and think like, oh, like that's pretty cool, like I remember Godzilla, and this, this makes me feel a little bit nostalgic, and they pick it up, they buy it, they take it home, and they enjoy it. They don't go online and just start typing online about how much they love or hate the figure that they just bought. Those kinds of customers are crucial to the success of mass-produced toys like the ones that NECA was creating. And on a sliding scale, I'm much closer to that target customer than I am to someone with a critical eye like Steven's Toy Reviews. There is kind of an irony here because Target hasn't existed in Canada in quite some time. But let's go with it. I make content from a place of emotional attachment to the series rather than getting into the finer details and history of Godzilla. You can go ahead and call it a monkey brain, but it's very much a sense of like, oh my gosh, big radioactive blizzard, that's awesome! But there's definitely a plethora of people who appreciate the finer details, which I can totally appreciate. Getting back to the topic of the video of brand wars, they're not new, but it wasn't always like this. MonsterArts had a really strong debut with their initial line of Heisei characters, which most were well received from what I remember, despite the first Godzilla being kind of stiff. Which they solved with an eventual re-release and redesign of the figure, which addressed all the criticisms. But as time went on, people started seeing cracks in the foundation. It was kind of like growing up and realizing that your parents aren't perfect. When you asked your parents why the sky was blue, it wasn't in fact because the sky was meant to match your beautiful eyes, it was because your parents didn't know what scattering is. Poor plastic choice, weird Showa scaling, and declining quality assurance all started to make the high price point of these figures not worth the while. When NECA announced that they were getting the Godzilla license back in 2014, people were really hoping that they were going to bring their signature reputation of high accuracy action figures at reasonable price points to the world of Godzilla like they were doing with Pacific Rim. But alas, jokes aside, NECA's offerings were far too stylized to ever really hold a candle to SH MonsterArts, with the exception of the 1962 figure. Kyugoji was also pretty good from what I could tell of what people were saying, but this guy was really strong, to the point where people were calling it a suitable replacement or alternative to the MonsterArts. And depending on who you ask, this figure had far more bang for your buck. But alas, NECA's time with the license was short and mediocre, ending in 2020. Then along came Super 7's announcement in 2021 that they had the license and that they would be doing every monster from every nook and cranny of the universe. And their stuff never stood a chance against MonsterArts. And this was mostly due to their preference for retro and toyetic stylizations, which many people voiced their discontent for. As a side note, I do want to mention how adverse the reaction, no pun intended, to the reaction line is, and like the stylized nature of those figures, when Godzilla's history of merchandise is enriched with stylized vinyl figures. Importing a stylized toy from Japan with high shipping and customs fees? A-okay. A stylized American-made Godzilla toy on Target shelves? But then along came HIYA Toys, announcing that they would be making figures from the Monsterverse. I personally had really low expectations after seeing their alien stuff at my local comic shops. It was just kind of small and it looked really fragile. It was just very unimpressive. And being so kind of historically starved of Godzilla stuff, I figured I might pick up some of their items, even though I knew it would never sit on my shelves alongside the NECA and MonsterArts stuff. But holy shit, was I wrong. For anyone that doesn't have the HIYA stuff at this point, the best way that I can describe it is that HIYA is making the stuff that NECA should have been making. I jumped through hoops to get their first Godzilla 2021 figure up here in Canada, and I was, quite frankly, blown away by what I got. Now, there are issues, right? Like, you can make the neck look all broken depending on how you pose it, and it's got the jaw peg, which is pretty visible, but you kind of, it doesn't matter. You lose sight of it eventually, you stop seeing it. But I think it's fair to say that when this figure came out, this was the definitive version of Legendary Godzilla to sit on your shelf. MonsterArts has its stylization and it's got more posability, but if you wanted screen accuracy, this was the figure. It lacks the articulation of the MonsterArts, but in my humble opinion, the screen accuracy more than makes up for it. HIYA moved really quickly to put out their versions of Kong, Mothra, and Rodan from Monsterverse, all of which, at the very least, like inarguably, are comparable to SH MonsterArts. And if you ask me, my personal opinion is that I would rather have the HIYA Toys stuff on my shelves for the Monsterverse product than the MonsterArts stuff. And if you ask me, the conversation of who is making better Monsterverse stuff between HIYA and MonsterArts begins and ends when you look at the King Ghidorah figures. HIYA's King Ghidorah is bigger, it is more articulated, and it is more screen accurate than the MonsterArts at half the price. Now, we haven't gotten the Ghidorah in hand yet, so it could be a complete wash, but their track record so far is really good, and if it continues that way, there's no question about it. Now, when it comes to whether or not HIYA or MonsterArts are going to be king of the hill, I've personally believed that we've needed to wait until we see the classics line. Making toys from 3D renders is one thing, but it's another thing to kind of look through every nook and cranny of the Godzilla fandom to find every detail, every piece of photo reference for these suits as possible, and to sculpt these things from scratch. And now we have our first glimpse of HIYA's first classics release in the 1991 Hokkaido Godzilla suit. It's been confirmed that it's going to be an exquisite basic release just like the Monsterverse stuff, and while we haven't seen those articulation cuts just yet, there's more than enough reason to be excited. And I don't mean that in a MonsterArts is finally getting their comeuppance kind of way. I just mean that for folks who have been looking for a place to get into a collection, to get into collecting versions of these characters, HIYA Toys is going to be a fantastic place to do that. But yes, conversations are raging online as to which company is producing better product, with both sides kind of slinging mud at one another. It's really bizarre how HIYA loyalists have this weird hard-on about the company destroying SHMA. MonsterArts has been a thing since 2011. It's proven itself. At this point, it's a more established toy line. People on social media are shitting themselves over the 1972 Godzilla and the Hedorah, and Gigan figures have all been well received. Why is it that customers that have been purchasing MonsterArts since 2011 are people, but the people buying HIYA Toys since last year are loyalists? Showing your hand a little bit too much, are we? That's alright, I'd rather be called a loyalist. It's a cooler name anyway. At the end of the day, I do believe there is a correct answer as to which company is better. Are you ready for it? Are you ready to hear it? It's MonsterArts. Or HIYA Toys. It's whichever one you like better. MonsterArts has been leading the product category for over a decade. The stuff they make is beautiful, and having someone like Yuji Sakai involved in the process of making them enriches their place in history and their place in people's collections. But this comes at a price, and if I'm being honest, I'm too nervous to fiddle with any of my MonsterArts stuff. I have a bunch of desk buddies, like from the Super 7 reaction stuff, that I love to fiddle with, like as I'm thinking and as I'm, you know, in meetings that I don't want to be in. I do that with Super 7 stuff, I do it with NECA stuff, I do it with my HIYA stuff. I can't do it with MonsterArts, I'm too scared. HIYA Toys looks to be entering the market with accurate versions of the suits we all love at a price point that MonsterArts has long since abandoned. The articulation that we've gotten on these pieces ranges from adequate to holy hell, and HIYA has shown that they're willing to go into the catalog of Monsterverse characters and give us action figures. It just might take us another dozen Godzilla repaints to get there. For longtime collectors, HIYA stuff being in that 7-inch scale means they're probably not going to sit right with MonsterArts that you already have. And yes, it's another action figure line doing Heisei, which many people are bored to death with. And it's been oversaturated for over a decade now. I also really don't expect the folks that have been collecting MonsterArts to make the leap and start collecting HIYA Toys. But that's okay. Each of these companies is offering something different, whether that's aesthetic, articulation, price point, character selection. And just to clarify, I'm not saying that these things should be exempt from criticism, right? Like, customers have every right to criticize the products that are being put out. But pointing out the fundamental aspects of product categories as inherent flaws, it just seems like borrowing trouble. HIYA isn't as articulated as MonsterArts. Maybe it's not supposed to be. MonsterArts costs more money than HIYA. Probably for a good reason. Super 7 looks too much like toys. Yes, that was the goal. Thank you for paying attention to class. The best thing that you can do is look at what these companies are offering and be honest with yourself when you're answering, is this for me? If the answer is yes, great. If the answer is no, perfect. If the answer is, it would be if it was done differently, then you need to look in the mirror and learn to let go. There is so much Godzilla product out there, and there's just more coming. You don't need it all, and you don't need to shame people for what they want. Unless it's Stan Winston's Godzilla. Before I wrap up the video, I just want to let you all know that I am going to be starting streaming this week. I finally got my equipment all set up, and while it's not perfect, it is more than enough to get started. I'll be posting updates on my Twitter, X, whatever, as well as a schedule on Twitch this week. So if you want to come out and chat about all things kaiju collecting, anything in between, that would be great. And for any updates, you can always follow me on X, Twitter. I'm so confused. And I'm always happy to connect and to chat about these things. So thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll talk to you again soon.